Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. Joining me next is Batya Ungar-Sargon, opinion editor of Newsweek. She has also been the opinion editor of Forward, the largest Jewish media outlet in America. She has written about how woke media is undermining democracy and also about how the elites have betrayed America's working men and women. Batya joins me now. Good evening. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. This is really a pleasure and an honor to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. Now, you've spoken and written about the abandonment of the working people of the United States of America by the political establishment. Can you develop that thought for us?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it echoes with a lot of the themes that you talk about a lot. You know, it used to be that the Democrats in our country represented the working class and the Republicans were the party of the rich and corporations and tax cuts and free trade. And what happened was the Democrats abandoned the working class to cater to what I call the over-credentialed college elites, people who get degrees and work in the knowledge industry. And unfortunately, the number one thing they pick up at their universities is to have contempt for people who work with their hands for a living, who work in goods and services, who do the kinds of jobs that we all rely on to survive. And so then what you had was one party that represented the rich, which was the Republicans, and one party that represented the elites, the credentialed elites, which was the Democrats. And that's how sort of Trump showed up and was able to really speak directly to the working class, the multiracial working class in this country, and say to them, look, neither party has a model that's working for you. The Republicans believe in this trickle-down nonsense. The Democrats basically want to cater to the elites and then have large taxes to fund a welfare state from the bottom to sustain the poor. But neither of those models is what the working class wants, which is what they want is an economy that rewards their hard work because they work really hard, and no one was really offering that.
Do the Democrats, do they even understand why Donald Trump appeals? Has that penetrated yet? Why his message is so effective for his audience?
It hasn't. And what we're seeing right now is an absolute reprisal of the kind of language we heard in 2016 when Donald Trump started to rise. And you had Hillary Clinton talking about this basket of deplorables, which was how she called the working class that was flocking to Donald Trump. Now you have this new book, White Rural Rage. They have invented this idea that the working class is racist and xenophobic in order to absolve themselves of the responsibility for having abandoned these people. And they say that they are racist because they want a national border and a trade agreement that protects their labor. This is now called racist by the elites, who, of course, are never threatened by trade, are never threatened by immigrants because they work in the knowledge industry. You need a command of the language in order to do that. You can't be threatened by somebody who doesn't speak English. Whereas when you're working class, those people are coming and they are competing in your industry. And we've seen how it has driven down working class wages.
If the Democrats are going to treat working people with contempt, just cast them aside into a basket of deplorables, what on earth do they think the consequences of that will be? What does it mean for democracy if the Democrat Party doesn't seem to feel as though it needs the people?
Isn't that ironic? You know, and they took it one step further. They literally tried to get Donald Trump off the ballot in multiple states. Can you imagine this? The side that calls itself the defenders of democracy literally trying to get the most popular politician in the country off of the ballot. There's just so much projection going on. And unfortunately, like we said, in these elite universities, they really imbue the students with this feeling that if you don't have that credential, if you don't have that education, they don't really learn very much, you really don't deserve the franchise. They really believe that somehow, if you don't agree with them on their chosen policies, you're not just wrong, but you are evil and a threat and dangerous, and you must be silenced and stopped.
But it sounds as though the Republicans also are at least partly inhabiting that same dysfunctional bubble. that political class seems to have divorced itself from the people almost in their entirety. How do they function as meaningful parties of people?
You're exactly right. What looks like a political divide in America is actually a class divide separating out the elites in politics, like you said, the elites in the media on both sides from the people. And the thing I try to explain to liberals, because they really don't understand it, is that the working class that votes for Trump, there's one thing they hate more in America than the Democrats, and it's the Republican Party. These are conservatives, and they hate the Republican Party because they feel that the Republican Party has sort of pimped them out and sold them out because they agree with them on social issues more than they agree with the Democrats. And so the Republicans say, okay, you know what? We can sell out your future on an economic platform because you'll never vote for the Democrats. So we have you hostage. And they really hate that.
Tom Buick, this sounds so familiar on our side of the Atlantic, doesn't it? That way in which the political class, if they are a class, have almost consciously cut themselves away from the people they're supposed to represent. You know, just do as I say and not as I do.
Absolutely, because when you look at the legislatures on both sides of the pond, they're both the credentialised class, and they've obviously come up on a tide of mass higher education on both sides of the Atlantic. That in itself is not necessarily the issue. I mean, what I find refreshing actually about our guest here is she's talking about how social class is still one of the most biggest divides that holds people back in our society. So I think both parties, particularly the Democratic Party in the US, needs to start attaching itself again back to that narrative in order to win over these voters that have gone over to Trump.
Batya, what do you see lying ahead? You know, if democracy in the United States, as indeed here in the UK, is in such a parlous state, what, when you look in the crystal ball, do you see unfolding in the months ahead? Well, of course, with a presidential election at the end of the year.
Well, I actually feel really happy about the state of our democracy, because if you think about it, you know, in the GOP primary, in the Republican primary, Donald Trump was outspent 2-1 by every single one of his opponents, and he still managed to win. So the electorate, by sheer force of showing up, was able to beat him. And then you look at what he's had to face from the Democratic side, the lawfare, the smears, the impeachments, and he's still managing to outperform Joe Biden in the polls. So I feel really good about the state of our democracy, because it does seem to me like the electorate is having its say, despite the billions and billions of dollars and institutional power that's been thrown at silencing them.
The electorate having their say. What a rebellious thought. Batya Ungar-Sargon, thank you for joining us this evening. I hope we can pick up this conversation again in the future. You're watching The Neil Oliver Show on GB News, and that is it for the hour on TV. So stay tuned for Free Speech Nation. But if you're watching online, stay tuned for our second hour, featuring more from George Galloway MP, plus Seb Gorka and Colonel Douglas McGregor.